friends, my name is Marines and I just read one of the worst books I've ever read in my entire life. I live tweeted City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, which was not good and I didn't like it, and after that I was still kind of in the snarky mood, so I put up a poll and the majority of votes went to Handbook for Mortals by Lani Seyram. Now if you've heard about this book, you probably heard about it when it magically appeared on the top of the New York Times bestseller list for young adult fiction, bumping The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas from the top spot in what would have been its 25th consecutive week there. I happened to be online when this was all unraveling, and it was actually pretty entertaining to see people get so invested in trying to figure out where this book came from and what it even was and how it landed at #1. Because for the most part, the majority of people had not heard of the book, had not heard of the author, and had not heard of the publisher either. Turns out that there were a number of bulk purchases made of books that weren't even in stock, specifically from booksellers that reported to the New York Times. Any guesses who made those bulk purchases? Things got weirder and weirder from there. There were like D-list celebrities involved and after reviewing the evidence that Book Twitter unearthed, the New York Times edited their list and Angie was back at the top, #1, where she belongs. Since then, Lani has spoken out a couple times, given a number of interviews, and from everything that I've seen, has been completely unapologetic about the whole thing. She also did this whole like, woe is me, YA is mean, and it doesn't make way for new voices, which is hilarious considering that #1, her book is not YA, and #2, there wasn't a single damn new thing in her book to be found. When I originally saw all of this happening, I tweeted about how much I wanted to read the book now. Honestly, I mean, that's honest. It made you curious about who this person was and what their book was about when they were pushing it so brazenly and being so unapologetic about what they had created, especially because the book seemed to be immediately attached to a movie that the author was starring in. Since the original drama, more and more things kept coming out. She kept making more comments. She started putting out promotional material that included her as a 23-hour New York Times bestseller. Alas, my curiosity could not be abated, so I decided to read and live tweet the book. I wanted to make this video as well because just apart from the wildness of everything surrounding the release of her book, I wanted to make a review that made clear that this was one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. It would be one thing if I came on here and was like, this author sucks and her 3-star book, you know, whatever about it, but I would honestly ask anybody who liked this book if 1, they were related to Lani, and 2, if they ever read another book besides this one in their life. And I know, everyone is entitled to their opinion and it takes all kinds and, you know, all that jazz, but I truly struggle to think about what anybody would find as enjoyable in this book. I'll start off by saying that this book had little to no plot. To me, Handbook was very obviously self-insert fan fiction. I'm not here to talk bad about fan fiction or even self-insert because I feel like that can be very useful, especially for younger writers, to see themselves as heroes, to explore their worth and their self-esteem. So there is value in both fan fiction and self-insert, but this just was so poorly written and so uncomfortable, especially in how transparent it was. I mean, the character is described exactly like the author. If you put the art of the cover of the book, which is a whole copyright issue in and of itself, with the picture, the author picture that the author uses, it's a little uncanny. There's even this bit in the foreword where whoever the author is that Lani chose to write the foreword talks about like, I didn't even really know Lani before I knew her, and I didn't even know how to say her name. Was it Lonnie? But no, it's Lani, like Annie with an L. And you're like, okay, thanks, forward. I guess that was pertinent information. And then you flip like 2 pages and it's the start of the book and the girl's like, oh, my name is Zaid. And so many people get it wrong, but it's like Zaid, like aid with a Z. And you're like, whoa. projecting much. This is obviously you, author. And the more you know about the author, the more uncomfortable this is. The author was part of this fandom revolving around Twilight, and she managed the band that one of the Twilight actors was in, Jackson Rathbone. And one of the legs of the love triangle's name is Jackson. And Jackson is in a band called the Plain White Tees, which is an actual band, and all of the band members in the Plain White Tees have their actual names, but then Jackson is just kind of in there. The second leg of the love triangle, his name is Mac, but partway into the book it is revealed that Mac's real name is Clark Kent. So did the author just write themselves into a love triangle with a Twilight actor and Superman? Perhaps that's harping a little bit too much and taking it a little too literal into what she's done, but it's difficult not to because the entire plot of the book is wrapped up in the love triangle. At the beginning of the book, we see Zaid running away from her small town life, and she's going to Vegas to audition for a magic show, and we quickly learn that the illusions that she's doing are not really illusions because she actually has magic. That, my friends, is all set up. That is what you get at the very beginning of the book. And then after that, after she auditions for the magic show, I really would be hard pressed to tell you what the rest of this was supposed to be other than love triangle. A string of chapters in the middle started with a few weeks passed and I still didn't know whether to choose Jackson or Clark Kent. And so the long and short of it is that we get a setup but barely any plot after that, and the main gist of the story seems to be that people surround our main character and tell her how beautiful she is. Which brings me to the main character, and just kind of looking back at that whole comment that Lanny made about the genre or the publishing industry not being welcoming to new voices, because this character is just a dumpster full of tropes. I mean, we meet her and she takes like 3 or 4 pages to tell us about what an important day is happening right now, but never actually gets to the important part because she describes thunderstorms and her house, and of course she catches a reflection of herself so she can stand there and tell us about herself. Even though the reflection is in a side mirror of a car, she tells us everything from head to toe about herself that she got in this reflection. And the descriptions are just so cliche. She, you know, everybody calls her beautiful, but she doesn't see why. She's not skinny. She can't call herself skinny because her butt is too big. There are no flaws that I could tell you about this character, no development. I couldn't even really tell you much about her. I mean, she likes motorcycles, she has magic, everyone thinks she's beautiful and says so a lot. I was comparing this to some of the other worst things that I ever read, and in that comparison I said that I hated Zaid less than Bella. I definitely did. Bella was more obnoxious to me and more hateful, but Zaid has a lot of those same qualities of kind of that tropey main character who's a jerk. One, she doesn't get along with any female characters in this story. There's really her mom, another female character in the magic show who's beautiful but a bitch, and there's a random person she meets at the mall and starts talking to because literally she has no one else to talk to because there are no other women and every other guy is in love with her. I actually just remembered that there was another female character who was like the wardrobe person, and whenever she's in the scene, I think it was maybe only even one scene that she meets the wardrobe person, and this character is speaking to Zaid and Zaid is tuning her out. Zaid is not listening, and it was such a Bella thing to do. If you ever read any of the scenes with like Bella and Jessica, I think is like her friend that she has, whenever Jessica is speaking, Bella's like, and I tuned her out because it's not important and nothing she has to say is important and I'm just here to keep up appearances and nod my head. That is exactly the feeling that Zaid gives off, in which she doesn't pay attention to anything or anyone if it doesn't immediately tie into her love triangle. The love triangle itself was I'm going to quickly run out of ways to tell you how terrible this was. So the love triangle itself, one leg of it was Clark Kent, who is like the manager, backstage manager, or showrunner, whatever it is. And he doesn't like Zayd from the beginning because she won't tell him how she does her magic tricks or whatnot. So they start off on this like antagonistic foot, but it literally takes 1 or 2 chapters to clear it right up. And it's funny because the author doesn't really realize how quickly this is all tied up, because she's like, man, wow, we were enemies and now we're not, shocker. And you're like, bro, you were enemies 1 chapter ago for no reason, and now you're not for, again, no reason. But you can tell that Clark Kent is supposed to be like the tough guy, the like alpha male love interest in the vein of like an Edward or a Christian Grey. Mostly you can tell that because he's the one that makes the animal noises, so he doesn't speak to Zayd. He snarls or he growls or he hisses at her, so that's how you know that he's the, you know, the sexy chosen one. The second part of the love triangle was Jackson, and he was just really bland. He was there to be the nicer one and the charming one, but he was never really charming to me, mostly because, again, he did nothing. He said much of nothing except for telling the main character how beautiful she is. And I always associate him with this one description that Zayd, the author, gives us about him and how he oozes charm like someone sweats in the Tennessee heat. Sweats buckets, I think is what she says. So the visual there. So apart from the bad behavior of the author, the lack of plot, the bland main character, and the bland love triangle, that leaves us with the writing. And that, I think, is what truly takes this from just a story that obviously someone didn't really give a ton of thought to into truly terrible territory, because I can assure you that about 99% of everybody watching this has written something better than the writing that I found in this book. That may seem harsh, and it is, but it's also honest. I really have a hard time believing that there was an editor who reviewed this, and there were even sections of this that I have a hard time believing Lanny herself ever read back after she wrote them. The text itself was full of errors. The writing was incredibly repetitive, and that might be directly tied to the fact that there was no plot, and so she would just tell us things about things. For instance, instead of starting the story right away, she tells us that she's going to start the story. So she gives us this whole like lead up about how this is the most important day of her life and she remembers when it all happened. And so she starts telling us things about things. So she starts telling us about her destiny and about like her own personal beliefs about destiny, and goes on about destiny, and we still haven't started this damn book. And it's a lot of just like thoughts or like personal beliefs or like stream of consciousness things that are just dumped in this book without any regard to, is this actually useful to the story? Does the reader need to read it? Is this entertaining in any manner? Do we really need to hear about guardian angels again? She does this with explaining the backscene workings of the magic show. I don't know how many times we get explained what show blacks are, when really it's just the term for the black clothing that people in behind the scenes at the show wear. We get explained multiple times that the weekend for the workers is different than the actual weekends because they're performing shows on Saturday and Sunday, and it's not that difficult to understand that, but it's a thing, a piece of knowledge that the author has that she wants to put in here, almost lording this over you because she knows a thing about show business. I'm getting a little worked up talking about this, but the writing was just so bad, and the fact that it was repetitive, that I would read a thing and be like, I wonder why that was there because we didn't need it and I didn't care about it. And then I would have to go along a few chapters and read about it again. And it just takes me back to this idea that the author did what she did to get to #1 with something that was so poor quality. Not that it would make it any better if somebody cheated their way to #1 with like the next great American novel, but at least you could see like, okay, I guess I see why this person believed so much in this novel, or was so pushy, or was, you know, so calculated about what they were trying to do. But to really go so ham with your self-insert fanfic that you never even read back I keep joking that she never read it back, and I don't know if that's true. She could read it to herself every night for all I know. But the point is that it really reads like a first draft, like an early novel effort. One from an author who is clearly not very experienced. The entire thing is completely overwritten. The paragraphs are dense and with descriptions that are not very good or are often repeated. Dialogue is varied. The dialogue is unnatural. It really reads like a poor first draft. The book truly is about dating, and there's no chemistry in the relationships that develop. There's a complete lack of action or driving force or even agency for Zaid as a character. She doesn't have to work at anything. She has her magic when she starts. She's basically a shoo-in for the magic show, as we later learn, and all of the men love her immediately as they see her, so she doesn't even have to win anyone over, and she doesn't even act in terms of the love triangle. She doesn't make a decision one way or another. She just waits around and waits to be acted upon. There's no antagonist. There's no villain. There's nothing opposing Zaid at all, because it truly is just wish fulfillment fiction. The end of the book and what is supposed to be the climax is that Zaid and the head of the magic show have developed this new trick, and they go on to perform it, but for reasons that are magically blah blah blah, because it's never really explained. The magic itself is so hazy that it doesn't really matter. Mac, Clark Kent, is supposed to be there, and he steps away because he's so mad, and because she doesn't have his presence to kind of like anchor her magic, it goes awry and she ends up hurting herself and like bleeding internally and going into essentially like a coma. She's unconscious. She's unconscious from about 65% of the book to about 90% of the book. And if you're thinking that that's going to interrupt the storytelling from a first-person narrative, oh man, you are wrong. Because what the character and the author then do is take the memories of the events that have happened magically out of the heads of the people that witnessed it, allowing Zaid to still tell us first person what happened when she was bleeding internally in a coma. If this sounds like a plot point, like maybe this is the action that I said wasn't present, what happens is that she's home, she's rushed home to her magical mother for the cure, and she's dying, she's bleeding internally, and everybody else present, her mom, her dad, and Clark Kent, sit around a table and tell stories about how Zaid's mom and dad met. And there's even a point where the mom and dad wonder if Zaid is gonna pick Mac or Jackson. Like, nobody is fussed at all about the fact that she's bleeding internally. And how am I as the reader supposed to care if nobody in the book cares at all? The big climax of it is that Mac has to like save Zaid and basically stab her in the heart with a knife that is not a knife. It's a dagger that's not a dagger, that is described by the book as basically like an EpiPen. Yes, the magical conclusion to the climax of the story is a magical EpiPen. Zaid is fine. She returns back to Vegas for a welcome back and congratulations on not dying party. Her estranged mom and dad remarry, and the David Copperfield-esque character in the book ends up being her dad, which is strange. She doesn't grow as a character because there was never any tension. Nothing really happens except for that she's fine. And now Mac believes in like her magic, which she didn't before. Truly one of the worst things that I've ever read, and completely unworth the fuss and the hype that she self-created by being a cheater. I could not name a single redeeming quality about anything that I read. I would recommend this book to nobody. I would not even recommend it to people who are like me, who enjoy like a bad book and to snark things, because it was so dense with things that you could rip apart that it almost became unenjoyable to do it. Like there were multiple times where I was like, I can't tweet enough. There's too much to handle in tweets, and you literally could recap. You could go line by line and explain why that line was trash. I know that this review was probably a little bit harsh, but I feel like I was honest and I wasn't exaggerating at all. That's just how I feel about this book. And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Check out the hashtag Snark for Mortals so you can get a little bit more of my real-time thoughts and also examples of her writing specifically, so you can see some of the errors and the repetitiveness, because I have screen caps